Under a sky that bled copper and rose, the prairie exhaled a tired wind across the endless grass. The land stretched in every direction like a sea stilled by memory, its silence broken only by the groan of a windmill and the occasional call of a meadowlark. On that land stood Clayton Reeves, a man as tall and steady as the gate he leaned against, his shadow long in the fading light. 30 years had shaped him into something both admired and feared, a rancher of great fortune, broad-shouldered, handsome, with the kind of presence that made men nod in respect and women watch from a distance. Yet his heart, though strong, carried a vacancy, an ache that wealth could not quiet. He had lived surrounded by cattle, horses, men who worked his land, and the hum of townsfolk who offered their courtesy as long as his coin kept flowing. Still, he carried in his chest the silence of an unshared life, and it pressed heavier with each evening. It was then the knock came, a sound small in measure but immense in consequence, 3 raps against his ranch gate, sharp against the twilight stillness. Clayton straightened, frown carving into his brow. Strangers rarely came unbidden to Reeves' land, and fewer still at dusk. He swung the heavy wood aside, and there she was, a hiv. A woman young yet weathered by travel, tall enough to meet his gaze without bowing her head, beautiful in a way that startled, her hair dark as raven's wings, her eyes deep with shadows no light could fully pierce. Dust clung to her skirts, the hem frayed by long miles, yet she stood as though the land itself obeyed her presence. "I seek work," she said, her voice neither pleading nor defiant, but steady, like the river her name would later reveal. "I can mend, I can ride, I can labor." She looked him square in the eyes, unflinching, as if she had known too many doors slammed to waste effort on soft words. For the first time in years, Clayton felt frozen, not because of the request, but because of what he saw in her. A strength wrapped in quiet dignity, a weariness that had not broken her spine, and a beauty that struck him not as adornment but as truth. He should have spoken at once, should have said yes or no, but his tongue stumbled. In his hesitation, silence stretched like a gulf between them. "You'd best try town," he finally muttered, though the words felt like betrayal. "The men around here, folks, they don't take kindly to—" He let the rest die in the dust. He could not speak the ugliness of their prejudice, though she surely already knew it. Her chin lifted slightly, not in pride but in endurance. "I have tried town," she said. "Doors closed there too." Clayton's chest tightened. Still, he could not let her in, not while the weight of every watching eye pressed against his shoulders. He feared the judgment, the whispers in the saloon, the steady erosion of his standing. And so he did what cowards do, he looked away. "I can't help you," he said, quieter than before. She nodded once, neither pleading nor cursing, only accepting. Her footsteps carried her away, soft but sure, fading across the prairie grass. Clayton stood long after she vanished, guilt rising hot in his throat. He told himself it was better this way, that he had protected them both from the cruel tongues of neighbors. Yet all that night, when the wind rattled his shutters, he heard the sound of her knocking again, echoing through his chest like an unanswered prayer. Days bled into one another, but her image lingered. He rode fence lines, counted cattle, signed papers, yet each task felt hollow. In town, he caught whispers of a native woman working odd chores for scraps, mending broken tools, sleeping rough beneath the cottonwoods. Some called her foolish, others dangerous, a wanderer who did not know her place. Clayton said nothing, but each word twisted like barbed wire inside him. One evening, restless beneath a swollen moon, he rode beyond his pastures. At the creek's bend he saw her, curled by a dying fire, a thin blanket no match for the cold. She slept lightly, as though always on guard. He did not wake her. He only sat astride his horse, staring at the fragile figure who carried herself like stone, and wondered what wounds she bore that he had added to. When he turned away, guilt followed him home like a stray hound. The storm came a week later. The prairie roared beneath black skies, wind clawing at roofs, rain lashing the earth until it bled into rivers. Clayton fought through the downpour to herd his cattle to shelter when he saw her again, a hiv, waist-deep in floodwater, clinging to a frightened horse that thrashed against the current. Lightning carved the scene in silver. Without thought, Clayton plunged in, hauling them both toward higher ground. He pulled her onto his own horse, her soaked frame pressed against him as thunder cracked overhead. His heart pounded not with desire but with the certainty that he could not let her vanish into ruin again. Back at the ranch, he led her into the barn, lantern light flickering against wet wood. She knelt first by the horse, rubbing it dry before tending to herself. He watched in silence, struck by the quiet order of her priorities. When at last she turned to him, her hair dripping and eyes burning steady, he asked her name. "Ahiv," she said simply. "What does it mean?" His voice was low, uncertain. "River." Her gaze did not waver. "It moves forward. Always." Something in him shifted then, as though the hollowness he carried had met its counterforce. He fetched bread and stew, setting it before her not as charity but as company. She ate, neither hurried nor shy, and in that silence something unspoken grew between them, respect, recognition, the faintest spark of trust. Yet doubt coiled within him still. What would the town say if she stayed? Could he withstand their judgment? The answer came quicker than he expected. Neighbors saw her at his ranch, and soon whispers grew teeth. "Clayton's gone soft," men muttered. "Taking in strays." Friends at the saloon avoided his table, their silence sharper than insults. For a man whose name had been his fortress, Clayton felt the walls crumble. He returned home each night with shame gnawing his ribs, unable to decide if he feared losing the town's respect or feared losing her more. Ahiv said nothing of it. She simply worked, mending fences with deft hands, calming skittish colts, moving through the ranch like water through stone, quiet yet reshaping all it touched. Clayton watched her from a distance, torn between admiration and the ache of cowardice. He remembered the night at the gate, his refusal, the look in her eyes. He could not bear to repeat it. The breaking point came when his ranch hands, emboldened by gossip, refused to take her orders while he was away. They laughed, mocked, threw careless words sharper than knives. Clayton returned to find her standing alone, tools in her hands, men smirking as if daring him to choose. For a breath he hesitated, old fear clawing at him. Then something hardened. He stepped forward, voice cutting like steel through rain. "She works harder than any of you," he said. "If you can't see it, the fault's in your eyes, not in her." The men fell silent, stunned. In that moment Clayton knew his choice was sealed. Ahiv looked at him, not with gratitude but with a quiet recognition, as though she had been waiting for him to stand on his own 2 feet. For the first time, she was not a guest, not a burden, not a stranger. She was part of the ranch, part of him. That night, when their hands brushed while passing a lantern, neither spoke, but the silence between them felt fuller than any vow. Seasons shifted. The ranch thrived, not in spite of whispers but because of what they built together. Some neighbors softened, others hardened, but Clayton no longer bent to them. One golden evening, beneath cottonwoods gilded by sunset, he found himself unable to bear the silence. He asked, plain and trembling, if she would stay, not as worker, not as guest, but as wife. She studied him long, her eyes searching the man who had once turned her away. At last, she nodded, her voice soft as wind in the grass. Yes. Their wedding was small, almost secret. A preacher, 2 witnesses, the prairie itself as their cathedral. Yet it was enough. In that quiet vow, Clayton's loneliness and Ahiv's rejections dissolved, leaving only the promise of a shared life. They built it together day by day, not with grand gestures but with the steady rhythm of labor, laughter, and a love spoken in touch and silence. Years later, those who ride past the Reeves ranch hear children's laughter rising over the fields where once only silence lived. They say the land grows richer each season, but perhaps it is not the soil that changed, only the people who walked it. Clayton found what wealth could never buy, and Ahiv found what rejection could never strip away: dignity. belonging, and a love that endured. And if you, dear listener, ever feel the weight of doors closed against you, or the shame of turning another away, remember this: love is not always a thunderclap. Sometimes it is a knock at the gate, a voice steady as a river, a choice made quietly in the face of judgment. Sometimes it is simply the courage to open and let another step inside.